Okay, so next we're going to talk about dummy variable, which is a substantial part of it. All right, so a dummy variable, before we talk about dummy variable, we will go back to regression for a bit. Okay, well, just now what we have talked about. So in regression, we have talked about exam, all right, and exam marks. Sorry, I missed the marks, and tutorial mark. All right. Okay, so exam marks and tutorial marks, and in this case tutorial marks affecting the exam marks. Okay, now when we come back again to the properties of scale, okay, the exam marks is basically a ratio scale. Tutorial marks again is going to be a ratio scale, right? It goes on from 0 to 100, for example, and at the same time we can see that in terms of ratio scale, 0 has a meaning. So in this case, if you have 0 marks, good luck, right? So you have no marks, right? So because of that, it's ratio for both. Now, how about if you have a variable that is actually a nominal or ordinal in nature? So for example, it could be male and female. It could be on and off. It could be yes and no. Now, because of that, the nature of regression only takes in a ratio number because they have to be quantitative. But if you have something like this, which is not quantitative in nature, all right, not oops. Okay, so not quantitative in nature. Now, because of that, we need to sort of devise a variable, which is what we call a dummy variable. And dummy variable only as simple as just to take a value of 0 and 1 to indicate an absence or presence of the category effect. Now, the most important thing that you have to take note is this. The number of dummy variables needed is the number of levels minus 1. So put a star in here. Oh, sorry, just keep changing. Okay, so the next question is, which variable should I convert into dummy variable? Well, as I said just now, so if you have a nominal, okay, and if you have an ordinal scale, then it is good for you to convert that into dummy variable. All right, if you want to incorporate that. Okay, let's take a look at the next example. As I said, dummy variable is only going to be needed when you have a nominal and ordinal variable that you really want to include them in regression. Let's take a look at this. So, for example, it is a pi cells, right? Now let's take a look at these pi cells, all right? So we want y to be pi cells. Yep, that's good. And x, which is the price. Yep. Now we want holiday in here. So what is holiday? Okay, let's see. So they want to say x2 is equals to 1 if holiday occurred during the week. Fair enough. Now before we dive into dummy variable, let's understand further on what type of or what scales of variable is this. Pi cells. All right, that looks like a ratio. All right. Price, also a ratio. Okay, So those ratio, you can just incorporate that into regression straight away. Holiday, however, it's a nominal. All right. So you do need to convert them into dummy. However, all right. So if you recall further, the number of dummy variables needed is the number of level minus 1. In this case, there are only 2 levels. I repeat, there are only 2 levels, which is holiday or no holiday. There are 2 levels. So indirectly, we only need to have 1 dummy variable. All right, I repeat, the number of dummy required, all right, is the number of level minus 1, which is right here. Okay, so there are 2 levels in here. We just need 1 dummy variable. Now, so what does it mean? Okay, if you have a 2 level and you want to convert them into dummy variable, you can put that straight away. All right, you can put that as part of your independent variable. Okay, so in this case, it's valid because it's only having 0 and 1, so there are only 2 levels. So this x2, all right, it's a dummy in nature, right? So you don't have to do anything else because there's only 2 levels. It sort of satisfies the requirement of dummy variable. Okay, so here's the results, all right? So let's recap that. Sales, number of pies sold in the week. Price is the price of the pie. And holiday, if there is a holiday occurred in that week, if there is any public holiday. So what we can see, so in this case, holiday, it's 15. So as you can see, if there is no holiday, all right, so if there is no holiday, oh, my bad. Okay, so if there is no holiday, so it becomes 15 times 0. Why? Because there is no holiday. So you only receive this score, all right? So 15 times 0 will be 0. So therefore, you don't get that score when there is no holiday. You only receive this score when there is a holiday occurred in that week. Okay? So this is 15 times 1. Okay? So therefore, the interpretation will be sales were 15 pies greater in the week with holiday than in the week without holiday, right? Because without holiday, it will be 15 times 0. Therefore, you don't get the score. But if there is a holiday, you normally get 15 more pie sales, right? That's what dummy variable is all about. Now, how about if you have more than 2 levels? Okay, let's take a look at this. Okay, now for example, we know that my dependent variable is house price, right? My independent variable is square feet, right? All right, and you can see here house is a ratio. Do we need to convert that into dummy variable? Absolutely not. Square feet is the size of the house in square feet, or another measurement could be meter square, right? So square meter. So square feet, square meters, they are all also a ratio, right? So do we need to convert that into dummy variable? Absolutely not. All right. And now we want to include style. And style, there are range, split level, and also colonial. Now because of that, this is a nominal variable. And because that there is a nominal variable, we need to convert this into dummy variable. Okay? Now dummy variable, how? If first of all, ask yourself, how many variables do we need to create? There are 3 levels. Okay? Range, split level, and colonial, 3 levels. Therefore, you need to make 2 dummy variables, right? Because the rule is n minus 1. All right, there are 3 level minus 1. You need to make 2 levels. Now this is a bit tricky on how do you actually proceed with this. Okay, now first of all is you need to actually make 1 into a what we call a base level. All right, I repeat. So after you determine that you need to make 2 dummy variables, first of all, you need to make 1 into what we call a base variable. Okay, or sometimes they call it a default category. Okay, so for example in here is that this is a colonial be a default category. So what does it mean by a default category? In other words, if you actually decide one of them to become a default category, you are not incorporating that into the regression. Okay, so I repeat, we have 3 and you can choose either one. Now it doesn't have to be colonial, so it's just that in this example it is a colonial, but it can be anything that you want. It can be range or it can be split level. All right, it can't be anything of that. All right, it has to be one out of these 3. All right, so I choose colonial as my default category or base level. Therefore, I am not incorporating that into the regression. Default category, not incorporating that into regression. Now, so what does it mean by I said I'm not going to incorporate that? Okay, so I'm just going to make 1 for house price, which is already there. I have the square feet data, which is also in there. Now, this is how we are developing the dummy variable right here. Actually, I'm gonna highlight this if possible. Highlighter. All right. So there you go. This is the one in yellow. Is actually what the dummy variable is. Let me change that to pen. All right. So make sure that this is how you are doing. All right. So as I said, colonial default category, we are not making the dummy variable. So the dummy variable will go to range and split level. So x2, it's only happening if it is a range type of the house, and x3 is only happening when it is a split level. Okay. Right. So I'm going to give you a brief clarification on what is that. Okay. Now, so x2 is only activated when range style of house is there. So if there is a range style of house, then obviously you will get 1. And if it is otherwise, so like for example, split level is not part of range, so you will get 0. And colonial is also 0, right? Because it's not range. You only activate x2 when it is a range type of the house. x3 is only for split level, so you only activate them if you have split level. Now the question is, sometimes people ask like, oh David, how about colonial then? Because we need to have indicators for colonial. If not, then we don't know whether the house is colonial or not. Well, not entirely. As you can see that the combinations right here, if you have range, you are activating x2. If you have split level, you are activating x3. How about if it is colonial? You are not activating anything. So this is like a code, right? So if it is 1, 0, it's a range. If it is 1, 0, 1, it's a split level. If it is 0, 0, it has to be colonial. That's what you can see. Okay. Now, so let's say if the regression equation is like this. Okay. So you will get the result in here. And for a colonial, right? So colonial house, as we see the code here, you don't get anything for range and you don't get anything for split level. So you get 0 and 0. So this is your base regression. All right. So your base regression will look something like that, because x2 will be 0, x3 will be 0. For range, right? Range, you only activate the x2 because x2 is only for range. So x2 will be equals to 1 and x3 equals to 0. So you are getting the extra score of 23.53. Okay. So the interpretation will be, with the same square feet, a range will estimated an average price of 23.53 thousand more than a colonial. All right. Why is it more than a colonial? Because colonial is our default category. Okay. The same thing here as well. With the same level of square feet, a split level will have an estimated average of $18.84 thousand than a base case level, which is a colonial. All right. So I forgot to say that when it is a split level, you don't get activated in terms of x2, but you only activated x3 because x3 is for a split level. So I hope this makes sense. How you actually generate dummy variable. In tutorial, we are going to teach you how you convert that into dummy variable in the data sense. So hopefully that makes sense. So do come to tutorial or lab sessions, and your respective tutor will help you to organize that.